Hey everyone, I wanted to share a story with you that I think is incredibly important for you to know about, but unfortunately we didn't have enough time in our rundown to include it in the show today. So recently there was an important Trump administration official, more importantly an HHS official, who decided to step down and no longer work for the administration. Now, what initially happened was the Trump administration attempted to demote him to a role where he wouldn't have much of the power that he previously had. And this is an actual expert, an actual professional. There are luckily still some adults left in the room when it comes to the Trump administration. But this individual was pushed out because he had raised some concerns about the Trump administration promoting the use of hydroxychloroquine as a treatment for COVID-19. Now, we had reported on the first part of this story. His name is Dr. Rick Bright. And after he stepped down, he actually filed a formal whistleblower complaint. And in that complaint, we're now learning of some of the other wrongdoings of the Trump administration in response to COVID-19. Now, this is devastating because it's yet another example of Trump administration officials being warned early this year, in January, that the coronavirus was significant, it was severe, and it was something that the government absolutely needed to start preparing for. But as Dr. Bright reports in his whistleblower claim, Alex Azar, who's the head of Health and Human Services, did not want to do anything about it. He was alerted about this in January. And we're also learning that both Dr. Bright and Peter Navarro, who's Donald Trump's trade advisor, were urging Trump administration officials to do simple things like stockpile remdesivir, which is now being used in emergency cases for people who are suffering from COVID-19 and absolutely need treatment. There really hasn't been any other effective solution so far. And we also know that the development for a vaccine has not yielded the results that we've been hoping for. Now, Navarro and Bright also warned that any shipments of medical supplies to other countries in February needed to stop immediately. But the Trump administration still went ahead in early February and sent all sorts of medical supplies, including desperately needed masks, over to China. So what we're also learning from this whistleblower claim is the following, and this is according to reporting from the New York Times. Bright, who was the director of the Department of Health and Human Services Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority until his removal in April, said in his formal whistleblower complaint that he had been protesting, and this is important, cronyism within the Trump administration. Look, we've been sharing so many stories of Trump utilizing the office of the president for personal enrichment, for personal gain, in order to give all of his buddies all sorts of goodies, with taxpayers essentially footing the bill. These violations of the emoluments clause in our Constitution should have been taken seriously from the beginning, and it just wasn't. And now we're dealing with a pandemic where tens of thousands of Americans have already died. We're expecting hundreds of thousands of Americans to die. Millions of people have contracted the virus. This is a complete and utter disaster. It's a crisis. And Trump is still using the office of the president in order to enrich himself and his buddies. And so there have been a few examples that Dr. Bright gave in his whistleblower complaint. After I give you those details, I think it's important to also consider whether whistleblower complaints even matter. How many whistleblower complaints do there need to be against the Trump administration for action to take place? Because he has broken the law, he has violated the Constitution. Yes, we had the whole impeachment investigation, which was spurred by a formal whistleblower complaint. And it just seems like all of those efforts really end up nowhere. And when you have a situation where people are dying, it's incredible to me how little these types of complaints lead to change. So as I noted, the Times did report on this in a very detailed way, and they say questionable contracts based on the whistleblower complaint have gone to companies with political connections to the administration, including a drug company tied to Jared Kushner. So again, we're learning two different things from this insanely lengthy whistleblower complaint. It's 89 pages long. We're learning, number one, that there had been multiple warnings to Donald Trump, to Trump administration officials, to act immediately in order to mitigate the impact of COVID-19 in the United States. The Trump administration clearly didn't take that seriously, even though some of these warnings were as early as January of this year. We're learning that even though the Trump administration was urged to stop sending desperately needed medical supplies to other countries, they continue to do so, including sending desperately needed masks to China in early February. And now we're learning, and I'm not surprised by this at all because we've had multiple examples of it throughout Trump's tenure, that this crisis is being used as a way to help Donald Trump's friends, Jared Kushner's friends, people who are well connected to the Trump administration, essentially profit off of the taxpayers' dime through this crisis. And it's just disgusting. So Bright encountered opposition, according to the reporting, from department superiors, including Health and Human Services Secretary Alex Azar, when he pushed as early as January for necessary resources to develop drugs and vaccines to counter the emerging coronavirus treatments. Also, at one point, Bright met with Navarro. They both had similar concerns, and during that meeting, apparently Bright urged Navarro to have the government stop exporting the masks. And then there was one other part of it. So they wanted to stockpile remdesivir. I told you about that already. And then there's this final part, which is to develop a Manhattan project for a vaccine. Trump ignored that, and he's now just implementing or just recently adopted the notion of this Manhattan project, right? Focusing on doing the stay-at-home orders, the testing, the procurement of medical supplies, all of these things Trump was told he needed to do early in the year, and he did not do it. Instead, though, he and his cronies focused on how they could take taxpayer money and grant incredibly lucrative contracts to their friends. That's what's happening. The Trump administration is robbing the taxpayer and at the same time refusing to provide the funding necessary for states to continue operating. And in the main show today, we're going to talk about how various states have now gotten so desperate that they're going to cut Medicaid spending. They're going to cut the services that Medicaid will cover in their states. And that is unbelievably depressing when you consider the fact that 30 million Americans have filed for unemployment already. I'm sure there are more to come. And these are people who relied on their employment not only for income, but for health care. So the Medicaid rolls are going to swell at a time when the federal government refuses to help states with funding, and states have no choice but to end up cutting these programs. This is what we're dealing with. This is what a lack of leadership in the United States looks like, and it means that more and more Americans are needlessly going to die when, in fact, if we had a real leader, we would have been prepared to mitigate the impact of coronavirus. It's just what we're dealing with. And it's just something to keep in mind because we're being robbed, not only of our resources, not only of our taxpayer dollars, but our ability to just live. Anyway, we'll share more on what's happening with coronavirus. There are big updates to this story. So we'll share that with you and more. Make sure you tune in, and thank you for watching.